You've probably heard of people going bankrupt, but just what does it mean? What are the consequences of going bankrupt? Is it easy to do? Just remember, in this case we're talking about bankruptcy as applies to individuals, not companies. And the other thing is that maybe you've heard of people going into an IVA. What's one of them? In this video, we're going to compare two of the main options open for an individual who's struggling with debt. They're bankruptcy and entering into an Individual Voluntary Arrangement, or an IVA as it's usually called. I'm going to cover the pros and cons of both options, but if you want to know more about an IVA and what it is, we've got another video and you'll find a link below this one. Before we start, I need to say that we strongly advise that you take professional advice from a licensed insolvency practitioner like Adcroft Hilton before deciding which route to follow. And by the way, our advice is free, it's friendly, and it certainly won't commit you to anything. Let's start by looking at the pros of an IVA. When setting up an IVA, your insolvency practitioner will work with you to decide a reasonable amount you can pay each month. They'll then go and negotiate with everybody you owe money to and get their agreement as to how this amount is shared out. Once this is agreed, you will make only the single payment to the insolvency practitioner. So a major pro with an IVA is that you will only have one monthly payment to make, and remember, it will be a payment you can afford. After you've entered an IVA, your creditors, remember that's people and companies you owe money to, cannot add any more interest to your debts, so your debts won't increase. Within the IVA, your creditors must deal with the insolvency practitioner, not you. Now that's a major pro, isn't it? No more hassle from debt collectors. In most cases, your house is protected, so you won't lose the roof over your head. If you use your car for work, or taking the children to school, for instance, so long as it isn't a valuable vehicle, you'll be able to keep the car. And this also applies if you have finance on the car, because the finance payments will be considered when we agree the monthly amount you can afford. In most cases, you don't need to tell your employer that you've entered into an IVA, although there are certain contracts of employment that state that you must do, but we can help you find out if yours is one of them. Entering into an IVA will protect your assets. An IVA usually lasts for 5 years, but once you've finished the 5 years and you've stuck to the monthly payments, it doesn't matter if you've paid off less than you initially owed. The IVA is over, and none of your creditors can come after you for the remaining money. They will have agreed to do this at the very beginning of the IVA. This is legally binding, so they'll be breaking the law if they do try to pursue you for more money. Now let's look at the not so good bits of an IVA. Don't worry, there aren't too many. It's a strict legal agreement, and you are committing yourself to making the monthly payments you've agreed to for 5 years. Whilst you don't have to tell anyone you've entered into an IVA, it will be listed in the insolvency register, which is publicly available. However, people would need to search the register to find the listing. And had you ever heard of the insolvency register before watching this video? Probably not. If you own your own home, you will be asked to attempt to remortgage your house in the last year of the IVA. Now, the IVA will affect your credit rating, so it will be harder for you to get credit in the future. Let's move on to bankruptcy, and again, we'll start with the pros. You're usually bankrupt for just 1 year compared to an IVA, which is usually 5. Although, in very rare cases, the official receiver might insist that the bankruptcy is extended more than 1 year. In the same way as an IVA, once you've been declared bankrupt, your creditors cannot pursue you during your bankruptcy or when it ends. You'll be allowed to keep your normal possessions, such as your TV and furniture, although you would be expected to sell expensive items such as jewellery or paintings. If you do not have any disposable income, you won't be expected to make any payments. In most of the United Kingdom, bankrupt people are no longer listed in their local papers. Here are some of the cons of becoming bankrupt. If you have any disposable income, you'll be expected to make payments for 3 years. You will lose control of your assets, and this would include your house or your car, for instance. And if you own your home, the official receiver will want any equity you have in the property, so you may have to sell your house. And with regards to your car, if you don't own it, you'll have to give it back to the finance company, because once you're bankrupt, you can no longer continue your monthly car payments. If you do own your car, and it's worth more than £1,000, you'll have to sell it and put the money towards paying off some of your debts. Certain jobs don't allow you to become bankrupt, and examples of this would be the police force or financial advisors. So you'd need to check with your employer before going bankrupt, and if you don't tell them, you might lose your job. You cannot be a company director whilst bankrupt, so if you're already a company director, you'd need to resign before going bankrupt. Whilst you are bankrupt, you cannot get more than £500 of credit. Your bank account might be frozen while you're bankrupt, and if you open another account, it can't be an account with an overdraft or credit facility. And lastly, as with an IVA, the bankruptcy will affect your credit rating, so it will be harder for you to get credit in the future. For both IVAs and bankruptcies, there are certain debts that can never be taken into account, and these are student loans, court fines, and maintenance or child support payments. Please don't enter into bankruptcy or consider an IVA without taking professional advice. Of course, we suggest you speak to us, and while there are other insolvency practitioners available, we think we're much nicer to deal with than them. Our initial advice is always given free. We won't judge you, we'll just try and help you.